مشاهدينا أينما كنتم أسعد الله أوقاتكم. أهلا بكم إلى عدد جديد من حصتكم الحقيبة الدبلوماسية. نواصل رحلاتنا بسفارات الأجنبية المعتمدة بالجزائر، ونحط الرحال اليوم بسفارة بلاد نيلسون مانديلا جنوب إفريقيا. وأسعد أن ننزل ضيفا لدى سعادة سفير جنوب إفريقيا هنا بالجزائر سيد دونيس جنبو. مساء الخير سيدي وشكرا على قبولك دعوتنا.
Thank you very much for having us.
شكرا. بداية ربما العلاقات الجزائرية الجنوب إفريقية ترجع إلى وقت بعيد، ربما إلى ما قبل الثورة التحريرية. اليوم كيف نقيم أو كيف نرى العلاقات الجزائرية الجنوب إفريقية؟
South Africa and Algeria have a very long historic relations. The relationship started in the dark days when we were still fighting against racial oppression and apartheid in South Africa, initiated by one of our leading lights, Nelson Mandela, who in the 1960s visited Algeria and engaged with the leadership of the FLN. This laid the basis for the training of Umkhonto weSizwe cadres, but importantly, it also led to the opening of the first representative office of the African National Congress here in Algeria. In 1994, when the democratic government was installed, Algeria was one of the first countries that South Africa established relations with. So for us, the work that was done by Algeria during the period of struggle remains quite historic. You would know of the historic session which led to the expulsion of the apartheid regime in the United Nations. That session was chaired by President Bouteflika, who at the time was the Minister of Foreign Affairs and was the President of the UN General Assembly. We know of many other milestones where South Africa and Algeria were together in the trenches, opposing apartheid, but also fighting for the freedom of the African continent. So the relationship is quite deep, quite historic, and is blossoming.
واليوم ربما بعد هذه العلاقات وهذه التجربة، خاصة في جانب الثورة والرفض لكل ما هو استعماري وربما عنصري، اليوم كيف هي العلاقات الجزائرية الجنوب إفريقية؟
The relationship between Algeria and South Africa remains strong, as exemplified by the last visit in 2015 by the President of the Republic of South Africa, Mr. Jacob Zuma, who brought with him a high-level delegation of ministers and business persons, because we believe as South Africa that it is important to continue the historic relations, but the challenges that the world faces today requires that we prepare for a viable and sustainable future for our young people. So economic development must be at the center of the relationship. We must have people-to-people diplomacy and make each other's countries the preferred tourism destinations of our people. We need to deepen the cultural heritage that we have and make sure that the history of our two countries is understood, not just by our peoples only, but is also appreciated throughout the African continent and the world.
جيد. كما سبق وذكرتم، ربما العلاقات السياسية انعكست على العلاقات الاقتصادية. جنوب إفريقيا من القوى الاقتصادية الكبرى في إفريقيا، وإن صح التعبير وفي ربما في المنطقة ككل. الجزائر شريك أساسي. اليوم العلاقات الاقتصادية بين الجزائر وجنوب إفريقيا كيف يراها سعادة السفير؟
It is a very important relationship. First, for the continent, and second, for the role that we collectively play in the sub-regions of the continent, but collectively with other African countries. It's critical for ensuring that we live in a better world. Starting with the bilateral relationship, we believe that there is a lot of scope and room for more engagement, and that we have not tapped the surface in terms of the potential that exists. Why do we know this? We know this because when we worked together towards the development of NEPAD, the new Partnership for Africa's Development, we were quite clear that unless Africans focus on the challenges of the day, put out a blueprint that will address their challenges from the perspective that they can sustain, we will not be able to overcome the challenges we're facing as a continent. So South Africa, Algeria, Nigeria, Ethiopia were some of the leading lights, including Senegal, in making sure that there was a viable program of action which will address economic development, and that's why we have since gone on to set up institutions that would make sure that the economic development of the African continent is something that is tangible, is something that is practical, and is an activity that every African can contribute towards if we are to be successful. So that's why elements of the new economic partnership for Africa's development have had to look at issues of governance in order to take away the excuse that Africans are misgoverning themselves, they're squandering their monies, they are not investing in their own development. And that's why the engagement has also sought to make sure that it's not only a government-to-government affair. It's mobilizing organs of civil society, is bringing on board young and old, women, people with disabilities, and it is a social movement of development of the continent. In our respective countries, we've got a lot of young people. We've got women in numbers. In fact, they might even be higher in number than the male population. This resource, which is underutilized, means that the economic development of the country, if it is not effectively tapped into, will not advance at a pace it could when we bring on board these resources that are actually not part of the economic development of the country. So we would need to look at startup projects. We would need to look at big business collaborating. We would need to identify areas which are very clear in our minds because both our plans have already identified for 2015 to 2019 clear targets of what it is that we need to be doing. So in those plans, we now need to translate the plans into viable and workable programs of economic development. So it's important for Algeria and South Africa to collaborate tangibly and to move beyond the rhetoric to practical programs.
جيد، هذا كلام جيد، ربما ومن الأحسن تجسيده على الواقع، لكن ربما ما هي المشاكل وما هي المعوقات التي تمنع تجسيد هذا أو تقوية العلاقات بين الجزائر ربما وجنوب إفريقيا وكل دول إفريقيا التي تبقى كل واحدة على حدة تعمل بشكل منفرد، مما شكل ربما نوع من الضعف للدول الإفريقية؟
Well, in the African Union, there is the Infrastructure Development Program. It's a presidential initiative which is being spearheaded by President Zuma on behalf of the African Union. In North Africa, President Bouteflika is responsible for, amongst others, rolling out the road that will help connect Africa from here in Algiers down to the Cape. So it's a very important project. The need for Africa to develop infrastructure is one of the biggest stumbling blocks. Without infrastructure development, economic activities become expensive and odious. So one of the issues that is a stumbling block in the relationship between Algeria and South Africa, currently we do not have a direct flight between Algeria and South Africa. This is a problem. For us as Africans to move from one part of the continent to the other, were sometimes called upon to go to Europe. When there are challenges in Europe, it means we actually cannot do business and we cannot travel between 2 points on the African continent. So that is a problem because it makes business expensive. It is cheaper to transport goods between, for example, Kenya and New York than to move goods within the continent. It can't be the way things are. We have to change that situation. We need to build infrastructure. We need to make sure that the shipping industry as part of the blue economy is developed and that we are able to trade amongst ourselves as Africans and make it cheaper, make it viable, and make it more effective. Those are the obstacles. We lack infrastructure and we lack the means of making sure that business triumphs.
جيد. دعنا ربما سعادة سفير نركز عن العلاقات الجزائرية الجنوب إفريقية أكثر. ما هي ربما أهم القطاعات الاقتصادية التي اليوم تشترك فيها الدولتين أو يشترك فيها البلدين إن صح التعبير؟
Well, you mean in terms of the economic trade? Well, there are several areas in which we are already doing business. We are doing business in mining. We're doing business in car manufacturing. We export car parts to Algeria. We export aircraft parts. We buy food from here. We sell food to Algeria. So there is some level of economic activity that has started. But agribusiness as a whole has got a huge potential. We have not really started, for example, trading in fruit. We've got lots of fruit. When it is summer in South Africa, it is winter here. So we can bring juice, we can bring processed food products, and it is not yet happening. If you look, for example, in the mining industry, we've got a lot of mining experience. We're one of the long producers of mineral resources, and we supply the world with various types of mineral resources. We have not collaborated sufficiently with Algeria to explore this and to work together. For example, in oil and gas, there aren't South African companies that are quite active in the oil and gas sphere. A number have already indicated their interest, but at the moment, there isn't that tangible involvement. In science and technology, we've got projects that we're doing together. The scope for developing relations there is quite huge. And in ICT, we've got projects that we've been talking about. We have been involved in nanotechnology, looking at groundbreaking research, and we're writing a lot of papers together. We're growing the science. We are publishing together. But we now need to move from theory to domesticating those new products, to producing them, to establishing industrial and manufacturing bases in light of the new discoveries that we've made.
جيد. فيما يخص ربما صناعة الأسلحة، هناك تبادل كبير بين الجزائر وجنوب إفريقيا في استيراد ربما أو لصناعة الأسلحة. هل يمكنكم تحدثنا ربما في هذا أعطونا ربما ما هي أهم ربما المستجدات في هذا القطاع الحساس ربما خاصة وما تعيشه إفريقيا من أوضاع أمنية متوترة؟
Well, as you know, the mission of South Africa has got an accredited defense attaché. There is a lot of cooperation that takes place between the South African defense industry, the Department of Defense, and the Algerian counterparts. And there are a lot of activities that take place between ourselves, exchange of ideas, intelligence collaboration, and ensuring that our industries are viable. We also share expertise. Of course, the defense industry is also in the business of selling and buying equipment. There are several projects that are currently underway. When they have been officialized, we will make announcements and they will come into the public domain. At the moment, they remain work in progress that has not yet been concluded.
جيد. ربما ما يتعلق أيضا بالمنطقة في إفريقيا اليوم، عدة دول تعيش ربما حراكا، حروبا، الشعب الإفريقي ربما يعيش وضعيات أمنية غير مستقرة. في رأيكم لما ترجع هذه الأسباب لعدم استقرار إفريقيا والدول الإفريقية بشكل خاص؟
Well, I don't agree with the view that Africans like war.
Not like war. It's live in war. It's not established. The African people don't like war, but the war it's already.
Well, let's talk to that.
Yeah.
Let's talk to that because I think it's important to understand that Africa is as it is, not out of his own choosing. Big powers sat in a conference room and partitioned Africa and gave each other the resources of the continent. They marginalized communities. They divided brother from brother, sister from sister, and they divided families. The consequence of that, whether it be in the period of slavery or that be in the period of colonialism, has been that the African people have not had a right to self-determination for hundreds of years. This has also seen internal divisions which were consciously encouraged by those who wanted to divide and to rule. The legacy of that divide and rule is that some were favored over others, and this has seen inequitable distribution of resources. Governments that have fought and won liberation in the past 60 years remain challenged in that the legacy of whether it be oppression in the period of colonialism or whatever regime was in place, there's never been space for the self-determination of Africans. It is for this reason that the Organization of African Unity was established, first to fight against colonialism, to unify Africans, and to make sure that there are viable programs of uplifting the lives of Africans. For that reason, we felt that now that political freedom was obtained, national liberation attained, economic liberation remains a big challenge. The inequality that exists within and between states remains a challenge. It is for this reason that there are people who are moving in and out of the continent, mainly out, which is young Africans who are looking for opportunities in Europe so that they can improve themselves and improve their families, but also assure themselves of a future. It is for this reason that Africans are moving from countries that are relatively deprived to countries where they see more opportunities inside the continent in order for them to ply a living, in order to ensure that they can better themselves.
جيد. نتمنى أن يتحقق ذلك وتتحسن أوضاع الدول الإفريقية. ربما في الحديث دائما في نفس السياق، اليوم الصحراء الغربية ربما هي آخر مستعمرة في إفريقيا، لكن هناك ربما الجانب المغربي ربما يرفض استقلال الصحراء، وربما ما أقره مبعوث الأمم المتحدة مؤخرا بان كيمون حول القضية أثار العديد من الجدل. جنوب إفريقيا ما موقفها ربما اليوم من هذا الموضوع، من قضية الصحراء الغربية؟
In 1994, when we obtained our independence, May, we inaugurated a new president, Nelson Mandela. On that day, Nelson Mandela reminded the people of South Africa, who were jubilant about getting their freedom, that Africa will remain not free until the issue of Western Sahara has been addressed. This has been on the agenda of the OAU and the United Nations. It has now been inherited by the African Union. There is no end in sight. The people of Western Sahara have been patient. They've been waiting for a date with the ballot where they would exercise a right to self-determination. To date, their waiting has been in vain. They have been patient, they've suspended an armed struggle, they've been party to fighting against terrorism, they've been supportive of initiatives aimed at combating crime and criminality in the region, and they have shown that they are a worthwhile ally in the prosecution of the struggle for the improvement of human beings. It was correct for the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to visit the region. It was correct for him to engage and to raise the issue because it is work in progress in the hands of the United Nations and specifically the UN Security Council. But for as long as the UN Security Council does not rise to the challenge, does not address this matter with the seriousness and speed that it deserves, woe unto all of us. Because the people of Western Sahara have been waiting for more than 40 years, and there is no progress insofar as this issue is concerned. So the people and government of the Republic of South Africa are very clear about the matter at hand. Sahrawis deserve a date with the ballot. They have a right to self-determination, and none can impose on them what the way forward should be. It is a fate that must be left into their own hands. So we would appeal to all who are involved in this conflict to make sure that we continue along the roadmap that has been spelled out by the United Nations, and we do everything in our powers to make sure that we do not make them more desperate than they already are, because desperate people adopt desperate measures.
الوقت يداهمنا، ربما وصلنا إلى ختام هذا العدد. قبل الختام نود أن نعرف لو هل سعادة السفير تعلم شيئا من اللغة العربية من خلال ربما تمر سنة من تعيينكم هنا بالجزائر كسفير لجنوب أفريقيا؟
Well, I am not formally learning, but in my engagements with Algerians, I am learning and I am beginning to understand how Algeria is working in this area. So, شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا. وما يخص ربما المطبخ الجزائري والأكلات التقليدية، ماذا يحبذ سعادة السفير؟
Well, I have visited many places. We have drank some camel milk and ate some dates, and it has all been crowned by having some couscous and mishwe. So yes, we have been a bit exposed. Unfortunately, I missed a wedding. I was invited to a wedding, but I had to go out of the country. So I look forward to the future invitations.
إن شاء الله. شكرا جزيلا سعد السفير. إلى هنا أعزائنا المشاهدين نكون قد وصلنا إلى ختام هذا العدد من حصتكم الحقيبة الدبلوماسية. نلتقي بكم الأسبوع المقبل. سلام.